Okay. All right, good evening. I'm Diane McFarland. I'm Dean of the University of Florida's College of Journalism and Communications, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 5th installment of our Innovators series. The Innovators series is sponsored by the James S. and John L. Knight Foundation. It is a unique program that brings in some of the brightest minds in media and communication to engage with us around the future of the industries that we serve, as well as the programs that will enable our students to get the best possible jobs when they graduate from here. We are very pleased to have with us today Sachin Kamdar, who is co-founder and CEO of Parsley. Sachin spent the day interacting with our faculty and staff, as well as students, and joins us here for a conversation with Dr. Sylvia Chan Olmsted, a member of our telecommunication faculty and director of consumer media research. Sachin earned a bachelor's in economics at New York University and a master's in education from Pace University. He served as a New York City teaching fellow, where he began using cutting-edge technology to customize curriculum around math and economics for his students. After he developed this methodology, he started an ed tech consulting company that built, implemented, and managed systems across schools in New York City. And he told us that his interaction with the Department of Education taught him about how big institutions operate and about what to do and what not to do. With these lessons in mind, he started Parsley with his college roommate, and it's a company that provides web analytics and content optimization. He speaks around the world on digital media and analytics, and he is a contributing writer for Forbes and Computer World. Sachin, welcome today, and thank you so much for spending the day with our students and faculty. I understand it's been a great day for everybody involved, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you everyone here for inviting me, and second of all, what a great group of people you have here, both the faculty and students. I've been so impressed. So future is strong. I'm really impressed.
Great, thank you. I agree with you, of course. So Sylvia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Diane, and thank you so much for coming.
Sure.
It's been great experience with both our students, and I've talked to quite a few after our breakout sessions. They loved it. They thought Awesome. It was a great experience. As the last event of the day, this will be just a conversation Sure. between us, and also we'll take some questions from the audience. And I know we probably will go over some questions that you have answered, being through, I don't know, 100 times today. But bear with us because Sure. we probably have a different set of audience today. We talked about your background in teaching
Yeah.
and the transition from education, being a high school teacher, to starting a technology startup many times today. And some of my students, they were just fascinated by this journey. Can you talk a little bit about your kind of mental process and this journey? How has that experience prepared you to be a founder
Sure.
and a CEO of a technology startup?
Yeah, so I think there's some stuff that I probably didn't talk about today, which might be interesting here for everybody. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some interesting things that I was thinking about when I made the transition from education over to starting my company. The first thing is that it wasn't necessarily kind of like a binary switch where I was like, okay, now I'm going to start a company, and that's what we want to do. It was a progression over time. The progression started with my passion for education and wanting to become an educator and sort of seeing that through. It led down the path of technology because I knew that technology was a better way to reach the diversity of student skills that I was dealing with at the school I taught at. And then that led me down the path of transitioning that into a platform for multiple schools to use. As Diane said, when I got to work with the Department of Education and talk to some of the players there, kind of got disheartened by how things were operating there. The simple thing is that you would think that students would be the center of the conversation for an institution like that, but I saw a lot of other things happening around politics and bureaucracy. So the fundamental reason that caused me to sort of say, hey, I want to start a company is by seeing how not to do it. I wanted to build a company that was different, that considered its employees first, customers second, shareholders third. And so that was kind of the impetus and what Andrew, my co-founder, and I started to talk about. But funnily enough, there's a lot of analogs between being a teacher and running a company. And a lot of similarities is almost like deja vu for certain things pop up every single day for me. So when you're a teacher, the core thing that you need to do is take a group of people, your students, set them on the right focus or the right goal for the classroom or even in their careers, and then motivate them and encourage them to reach those goals, really strive for it. And that's not so different than running a company. You have a set of people, these are not students, but they're your employees, and the focus for you is to say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve for you individually, for us as a company, and my main job is to make sure that you are motivated and encouraged to accomplish that task. And so the similarity between how I needed to do that as an educator and how I need to do that now as the CEO of a company is very, very similar. And then there's like smaller things. I think we were talking about this last night with a couple of people where you get like just small things that are funny that are similar. So I'll get an employee that comes to me and says something like, I can't work well with this individual. I don't know how to collaborate with them. And that's like, to me, that was just like my high school students coming to me and saying the same thing. So I think there's definitely leadership traits and qualities that transition from when you're an educator to when you have to run a company.
Okay, I think some of them are fascinated because they're nervous about their first job, their career. So do you have any advice for them as they choose their first job? They graduate, they think this might not be it.
Yep. Yeah. So I think the first piece of advice I'd have is don't worry about that too much. If you're a smart, which almost every single person I've met today has been incredibly smart, and you are dedicated and hardworking, I wouldn't worry about what the job is that you're going to do next. The most important thing to recognize, in my opinion, is that right after you graduate, and for a few years after that, it is some of the most unique time that you have. And the reason why it's unique is because the cost of switching or doing something else or following your dreams or your passion is really low. Project yourself like 10 years, 15 years in the future. You might be married, you might have kids, you might have built yourself into a community. And if you wanted to go and start a company in Paris, that would be a really hard thing to convince all those people to do. Or if you just wanted to change careers altogether, that would be a hard thing to do. So right now you have an opportunity, and you might think it's like hard. You're like, okay, I've been planning for the last 4 years or maybe 10 years or 12 years to go a certain path. But the planning is not a cost. That is just resources that you have right now. The cost is like, what does it actually take to switch or do something else? And so you have the freedom to explore, to try out different jobs, to not worry so much about your career path. Because the jobs will be there for smart, hardworking people. And as long as those are traits that you think you have, you'll find the right path.
Okay, great. Let's focus a little bit more on analytics. I'm thinking more a show and tell approach to maybe demystify what analytics platforms actually do. This morning you mentioned there are three kinds of people, three groups of people use analytics platform. The audience development group, editorial team, and then the managers. Okay, can you give us some examples how these different groups in the digital content publisher setting, how they make better decisions because of digital analytics?
Sure. And I'll take a step back from there first and say, why is analytics important right now? Why do people care about analytics in media or really any company, right? And I think for Parsley and for media, it's because it is a mechanism, a voice of the consumer or the user or the reader or the viewer on your site. They're actually telling you what they're interested in, where they're coming from, what they care about, all of these key pieces of things that they're subtly telling you. They're not saying like, hey, I want to watch more about X. But if you have the right mechanism to aggregate that data and to deliver it in a way for your team members, your organization, that becomes really powerful, because all of a sudden what you did is you closed the gap between the user and the creator or the manager or the audience development person or the analyst or whatever it might be on the other side. Now they have a direct path to understanding exactly what that user, who that user is and what they want. So that is the power of analytics. It turns something that for so long has been a one-way conversation into now I can understand my readers, my audience, unlike ever before. So the challenge is like, how do I actually do that, right? Like analytics, I think, for so long has been software that people have steered away from because you think that you need to have some type of training, technical training in it. You might need to be an engineer. You might need to be an analyst to actually understand or demystify the data, as you put it. What more and more companies are trying to do, and Parsley is one of them, is trying to make that not a requirement, that if you have access to software like Parsley, then it just becomes natural to ask the right questions and get the right answers to those questions just by sheerly using the software. So for those three different roles that you talked about, there's a lot of different use cases, and it stems from what the focus and goal of the company is, what their business models are, how they're approaching their audience development or their growth overall. But there are just very small things you can do too, and questions that traditionally have been really hard to answer become easy to answer at your fingertips. So questions like, what authors are driving the most loyalty on my site? If I want to drive more audience from Facebook, what are the topics that I should be writing about? If I want to focus on search, where are the sections that are driving the most audience to my site? If I care more about engagement because I want to create something that people are spending a lot of time with, what are the key posts or the key types of metadata that are going to actually drive that stuff? So those are all the kind of easy questions that you can get out of it, but then you can steer that back towards the sort of larger looming things that you need to focus on as a company, which might be, how am I going to drive revenue with this new business model, which might be subscriptions or paid content. And then you start to work your way back. Well, okay, if we want to drive subscriptions, that means that we need to have people that are loyal enough to our brand that they're going to pay for something. So if loyalty becomes the most important factor for us, how do I architect my team around that? So now I'm going to say that returning visitors is the most important thing for us to focus on as a company, and my social media team, my editorial team, my audience development team, my marketing team is all going to be focused on using returning visitors as a measure of success and kind of demystifying what is causing people to come back and read more content on our site.
You mentioned the social media platform, Facebook and Twitter, and you talked about we have this emerging new complex content ecosystem that Google has the AMP, and Facebook has its own, and then your Apple News. I mean, what are some major challenges for media organizations now? Content's housed, distributed everywhere.
Yeah, so I'll start with why it's an opportunity first, and then I'll get into the challenges. So a question that you might ask is, why do all these huge technology companies care about content on their platforms? Why does Google want their content to live on Google AMP? Why does Facebook have instant articles and are trying to convince publishers to publish on Facebook Instant? Why does Snapchat have Snapchat Discover? Why do they care about any of these companies' content, right? Because they have tons of content. That's not a problem for them. Everybody is uploading new pieces of content every single day. I bet you right now, you guys are uploading something right now as a form of content, right? So yeah, maybe I'll actually throw it at you guys. Why do you think they care? Yeah.
They don't want to drive the content to other websites. Like, say, Facebook's posting articles about the newest news of the day. They don't want to have someone post an article linked to Fox News and have people go to Fox News for the article instead of Facebook.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a key component where they want they want to monopolize your time. They want you to stay on Facebook or Google or Snapchat and be that the mechanism of understanding what's happening in the world, right? I think the second factor is actually on the money side. It's way easier to monetize content than it is to monetize status updates or Snapchat pictures, right? Because orienting yourself with a brand like the New York Times and selling against that is something that a lot of brands want to do rather than like, what you ate for lunch. So I think that's a second factor too, right? Which is that these companies are recognizing that content actually is very, very important, not just to keep people on your platform, but actually to monetize your platform too. So why are those two things an opportunity? They're an opportunity because that means publishers have power, media has power. These large technology companies that we were once so scared of are now asking us for permission to put their content on our platforms. So that's the opportunity, is that there's power in having good content, a good brand, and using that as leverage to strike really good deals for yourself. The second reason why I think it's an opportunity is because if you decide to put your content on these platforms, then you almost inherently are going to reach new audiences that you might have never touched before. And so that's an opportunity to grow the top of your funnel in terms of who you want to target, how you want to get them to your site. The challenges are you have to cede some control, right? So if you're going to push your content on these platforms, you have to cede a certain amount of control over them because they're the ones that are creating the user experience. They're the ones that are deciding what gets shown, what doesn't get shown. And so, not surprisingly, I think that data is a key component to bridge the gap there, because data can help you understand if you're putting stuff there, what is going to work, what's not going to work, what type of audience is it driving, how can that actually be value add instead of something that you're required to do because people are your competitors are doing it, right? So I think if you have a right strategy to pull in data from these sources, something that Parsley is actively working on, and you can combine that with your own proprietary data, which is data that's on your website, then you might have a leg up to understand the connection between the two and create the right strategies for your organization.
Great. So along the same line about the audience news discovery journey, you wrote an article on Forbes.com about the death of the homepage.
Yeah.
And with all this push media type of news consumption. Can you comment on that, about how no more homepage, or how do we still engage in different ways in drawing, in terms of the journey of discovery?
Okay, so let me just ask the audience really quick. How many people today have visited a homepage to read a piece of content? Maybe like 5 people out of 6, 7, maybe like 10 people here. And just can I get a shout out of what the site was? Somebody, any site?
New York Times.
New York Times, right? Sorry?
ESPN.
USPN, yep. Anybody else? One more? PBS. All right. So PBS, ESPN, and New York Times are 3 sites that people visited homepage for today. Now, with all 3 of these sites, would you go to them otherwise? If you didn't go to the homepage, would you find yourself landing on these sites regardless? Maybe. Yeah, probably. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of interesting things there. So it's not surprising to me that New York Times is a site where people are visiting the homepage, because that's what they want. They want to convince you that they are worthwhile enough that you are going to go to their homepage and eventually become a paid subscriber. That's how their business is growing right now. And so that's really important to them. ESPN almost has a monopoly on sports content, so that's just not surprising in general. Although I think there's a lot of opportunity to disrupt them, and I think a lot of people are seeing that right now too when it comes to sports-oriented content. PBS, I don't have an answer for that one. But I think, well, PBS I do have an answer for, which is it's a long-term brand that people care about, and I could see people going to it. But the majority of you did not raise your hand here, and the reason why is because you've become reliant on other mechanisms to deliver news to you. And I would argue that the majority of people here are relying upon social. So your set of peers that you're connected to on digital platforms that are telling you this is something important to read, this is something that you should care about. In that instinct, that sort of natural inclination to rely on social is as old as gossip is. This goes all the way back to when people first started sharing news, before there was a printing press, before there was the internet, where the way that you found out about things was through your social community. You asked people, what is interesting, what's going on. And so that, I think, is just natural to humans in general, that the way that we value news is through how it's being shared socially. And I think even before the social networks, this is harder to measure, but I think a lot of sharing happened via email or via just sharing it on an instant messenger or something like that, where it's check out this article. And that would be a huge driver of people clicking on it. The homepage is dead, quote unquote dead, for a lot of companies because social has become such an important mechanism of discovery. And people are relying on that as a factor. And I think to a large degree, people are happy. And I think there are new methods of discovery too, with Snapchat Discover being something that's entirely new, with video becoming a more important player there. But yeah, I think it's the natural inclination for humans to use social as a means of discovery, and that making its transition over to the digital space that has drawn people away from the homepage and back to their sort of social landscape to understand what's going on.
So now a lot of the digital content publishers, news organizations have access to all these wonderful digital analytics platforms. Over the years, you have probably interacted with a lot of your media clients. How have these tools, the data and the analytics, changed their content strategy? I mean, do they gather news differently? Do they present them differently, or overall, every aspect?
It can be transformative across the board. I'll give you a couple examples here. It can be empowering to just an individual content creator. One of the things that we crave when we push something out there, and this is, you can think about you as individuals, even if you're not creating content, I'm sure you're putting, again, stuff on Facebook or Instagram. And what do you crave after you put that thing out there? Who is liking my stuff? Are they commenting on it? You really want that feedback of what people are doing with the content that you're creating. And that's been starved in this industry for so long, where the only way you as a content creator could get that feedback is through working with, this is even as early as 6 years ago, right? Through working with your analytics or business intelligence team, asking them for an analysis. They probably want to do it because they have a million other things to do, and you just would never get it, right? But now you, through software like Parsley and other ones out there, that's at your fingertips. And so now all of a sudden you can get immediate feedback about the content that you're pushing out there. And it's not just the real-time feedback, it's also what's happening historically. So over the past 3 months or year, what has my own personal audience, the people that are reading my content, care about? And that can change the way that you're reaching out to them, because you recognize that we did a case study today that with Ars Technica, where we saw that a lot of their traffic was coming from Reddit, where you realize that Reddit is a good platform to use to go engage your community, and maybe that's going to drive them to read more of your content. So it's things like that where just simply having access to the information has transformed the way that you think about your audience and the way that you're creating content. There's other examples too where if you have information about devices, you can change the way that you're creating content, what times you're pushing out that content, the formats of your content, to really sort of meet the user's expectations. And that's really where we are today, where the user, the reader, the viewer is the person that has the power. They're the ones that are expecting the best. They're expecting the best user experience. They're expecting the right type of content for them. And that expectation cuts across every category, from media sites to social networks to search to basically anything out there. And so that expectation is a tall order. With the right technology, with the right approach, though, you can meet it.
So we have all these benefits. What have you seen as the wrong ways of using analytics and data from news organizations?
So there are so many wrong ways that you can use it. So one thing that's interesting about data is that it is objective. It's not trying to tell you a specific thing. It's just objective. This is what it is, right? You as an individual, though, just with like what we see happening in media itself, is that you can craft data to tell a story that might not actually be the true story. And we see that happening all the time just in journalism with wrong uses of data, correlation versus causation and not the right application of that methodology. And the same thing can happen when you're thinking about your own analytics and your own data, where you can have it tell the story that you want just because that's the story that you want to tell. And so there has to be the right support and infrastructure behind that. I think primarily the organization has to be on board with the same goal. And it has to be a goal that everybody is on, not just on board with, that it's clear to everybody what that is. So whether that's growing your site, whether that's a monetization-oriented thing, whether that's just creating really engaged content, whether that's having the most social impact, whatever it is, everybody has to be on the same overall goal. Maybe teams differ a little bit, but the overall goal is similar. Once you do that, it's harder to craft the data to tell the story that you want, because you might be able to say prior to that, this story is really successful because this story got 1 million page views. The next person will come into the office and say, this story is really successful because this story had the most shares on Facebook. The other person will say this story was really successful because this story created the most time spent on it. Those are 3 different ways to look at success. Each one might be successful in the way that they told it, but if the organization isn't clear with what they want, hey, our most important thing to do right now is to grow our social following, then the rest of it doesn't really make sense. And so now if you have that as your goal, you can say, hey, the one that had the most shares on Facebook, that actually was its most successful story because you created the right approach to asking questions and answering those.
Great. I read it somewhere that Parsley's mission is to unlock the value of content through data and analytics.
Yeah.
In what way would you say your product or digital analytics, content analytics in general, deliver that value for news consumers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it goes back to that tall order of the user expectations being that this is no longer you just putting this content out there and you don't care if people read it or not. The expectation that, hey, I'm a reader, I want a good experience, and I want to make sure that I'm getting delivered the content that I care about. So that's really hard to do unless if you know what they actually care about and how they're using your site and how they're accessing your content. And so I think data and analytics unlocks that part of it, where now you have the transparency to understand your audience both at a micro level and a macro level, and then you can create the right type of experience for that user, which hopefully brings the value all the way back to the user at the end of the day.
So what are some biggest gaps in understanding digital content consumers?
What do you mean by biggest gap?
Knowledge gap. What are the things that we need to learn more about?
So I think there's just it's not necessarily a knowledge gap, but I think the premise that you need to understand your user is the first gap that I see, because not every institution out there thinks that the user is kind of the center of the way that they should operate. Once they turn to like a customer or user-centric approach, the rest of the stuff kind of falls into place, where it's like, okay, well, if we're creating this, what would the user think? What would the reader think? Do we have anything to back up the fact that we're taking this approach? If we decide to build a mobile app, why would the user care about another mobile news app out there? What are the things that we need to do to differentiate ourselves, or what data do we have that makes sure that we're pushing out the right content? So I think the biggest first step is just getting to the user-centric, I need to understand that user as best as possible philosophy. And if you have that culture inside your organization, the rest of the stuff kind of follows, because you're just automatically geared towards, I want to understand the user, I'm going to get around any knowledge gaps that I have.
Okay, what do you think about the Google way, that book Eric talked about, the people don't know what they want?
Yeah.
just give it to them. Technical advancement is much more important than market research and all that. How would you respond to that?
Are you referring to like the fact that he's saying that we should just use algorithms to decide what to deliver? Or?
Using technology to decide.
Yeah.
Instead of people don't know what they want until you give it to them.
Right. Oh, yes. I see
Yeah.
what you're saying. You're
Yeah.
saying in terms of like feature development.
Yeah,
and things like
and
that.
all that.
Yeah. So that is, there's some truth in that, right? So when I think about product development at Parsley and how we decide what is the next feature we should build, right? And when you talk to, when I talk to our users, when I talk to our customers, they have a lot of ideas, a lot of great ideas about, hey, this is the feature that I want. You should build like this, or you should build that. But I think what's important as a technology company is to actually understand the underlying problem that they're facing. So why is it that they want this feature? What is it that they're trying to solve with this feature? And if you can understand that, you might recognize, because you have all the resources of being a technologist or a software company, there's actually a better approach than what they originally thought was going to be the feature that they needed. And so there has to be a mixture of taking in customer feedback, distilling that into the problems and the solutions that they're trying to get to, and then using your own capability, the talent of your team, to really build the thing that you think is going to be best. And sometimes they have no idea that that actually existed or that was actually possible. And I think that's some of the truth that maybe Eric Schmidt was trying to get to with that.
Okay. So what's next for Parsley?
So we've grown a lot as a company, and one of the things that we're trying to do is not just grow in terms of the, like our revenue and the number of employees that we have, stuff like that, but grow in terms of who we're targeting. For a large part of our history, we've worked mostly with digital media companies, both traditional and new upstarts in this space. And what we've sort of found recently is that more and more companies care about content in a meaningful way. And they've actually started coming to us and starting to use our technology. And these are companies that aren't traditional media companies, companies that you would term more as like brands. Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 brands that care about content. So to me, that says a couple of things. One, the space is evolving, and I think that what we're going to see is, maybe not the too distant future, an overlap between what you think of as a traditional media company and what is going to be other content creators out there on the brand side. Two, that means for you guys, there's a lot of job opportunities looming. I think we've already seen this. More and more companies are trying to hire people with a journalism background, not to be traditional journalists, but to work in creating content in new and different ways with new and exciting companies. And then three, for us, that just means we can work with more types of companies that are interested in content, the future of content, and how to use data and analytics to better understand their audience.
Okay, so since you're talking to the students, change the direction a little bit here. What would you do if you were 21, 25 again? What kind of things would you do besides coding? I read about the coding part. I mean, anything else?
I would start a company.
Okay.
I think some of the best lessons that I've learned is through starting Parsley. I probably matured more through starting this company in the last 6 years or so than I probably would have otherwise working for somebody else in 10 or 20 years even. I don't have the experience working somewhere else 10 or 20 years, so this is speculation on my part, but I've known how much I've grown as an individual. And so even if it wasn't Parsley, I'd start something else. And if I find myself down the road not working with Parsley, hopefully for a good reason, then probably I'm going to start another company. There's just so many awesome things about it. And don't get me wrong, there's so many tough things and challenges about it and so many reasons why you lose sleep and, I'm losing hair faster than I probably should, but the upside is worth it.
Okay. Any other advice for students?
I there was one class I was in where I felt like the whole thing was just life lessons. I felt like a therapist or something. But yeah, I think there's some interesting things. So first, I would ignore the doom and gloom that you often hear about in this industry. It's just not what I see. I know that it tends to dominate what people talk about, but I see the flip side of the equation, which is so many new and exciting companies entering this space, going from 0 to or 1 rather, to like 5 people, and just creating these amazing companies. And these are media companies that are just so exciting, and I think are just going to be the next generation of how this space evolves. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I talked about this earlier, but don't be afraid to switch. So if you find yourself in a place where you are not confident about what you're doing, or you find something else that you think is more exciting or more reflective of your individual skills and talents, just go for it. Like, there is no better time than now to do this type of stuff, and you'll regret it later if you don't go for it. So that's the second piece. And the third piece is take what you're learning in journalism school not as a mandate to go into journalism, but as a skill set that can be applied a lot of other places. One question that I got today was, okay, you graduated with a degree in economics, but you're not an economist. Do you actually use anything that you learned there? And I said, yes, absolutely. I use the kind of logic behind how an economist thinks almost every single day in my life. And that's the same thing with journalism. Yes, you're learning about an industry, but more importantly, in my opinion, you're learning a certain set of skills that I think make you very special and valuable in the market. And if you think about it that way, that expands who you can potentially work for or what you can potentially do. So I encourage you to do that.
Fantastic. I think that's enough of me asking questions. So that's open to the floor. Any questions?
There's one back there.
Mm-hmm.
So you were saying how it. Hello? Okay, this is weird. You were speaking about how it's important to take into the consumer and what they want out of the product, the social media website. So an example would be, let's say, Twitter. Right now, they're thinking about expanding the limit to 10,000 characters. But you see a lot of the reaction from the users saying, I'd rather have an edit button than 10,000. Because what makes Twitter maybe so special is the quick hitting 140 characters, you get it out, and that's kind of it. So when you kind of have this overwhelming response from your users saying, we want this, not this other thing that you're trying to push on us, how do you respond properly and take that into account?
Yeah, great question. So I don't know the right answer to the Twitter thing. I don't know if them going the 10,000 characters route is going to be successful for them or not, or even if they decide not to do that, if that's the right decision. But it's important to recognize that the loudest voices aren't often the right voices. So we saw this with Facebook, actually. How many times did they change the newsfeed, and how much uproar was there over them changing the way that they architected the newsfeed, what they showed? How many different features have they implemented where people were just yelling at them for that? And you could say that maybe what people were accusing them of or not accusing them of was right or wrong, but ultimately Facebook has become a behemoth. We're seeing them drive more traffic to our sites than Google is. We're seeing them have crazy earnings reports every quarter. And so I think it's important to really kind of go back with, I guess, what Eric Schmidt said, which is you got to have a mixture of what the users are telling you, why they have those issues or those problems, and your own intuition, your own talent, your own team to come up with the right approach overall. So it's a combination of those two things that really creates the best products.
Questions? Over there.
Hi.
Hi.
As far as being, let's say, us in college, what would you say would make, if we're somehow to interview for you, would make somebody stand out? What makes the difference in college that makes new bosses or entrepreneurs want to pick somebody?
Yeah, good question. This was a question that was asked a couple of times too today. So I think that the really key thing that you need to understand when you're applying for jobs is there are three parts to the equation. There are your experience, your skill sets. There is the problem that the company has, and there's the solution that might or might not include you and your skill sets, right? So what anybody that's recruiting has to do is think about how those three things are working themselves out. And so often the way that people apply to jobs is by taking a me or an I approach, where if you look at their cover letter or you hear them talk about themselves through an interview, it's, I've done this, these are my skills, this is what I can do, right? And that's helpful to a point, but that means that you're leaving it on the recruiter or the CEO or whoever the person you're interviewing with is to figuring out the other two, which is, okay, I have this problem and how is this person going to help me solve this? And that's leaving out two very key important variables. So what I suggest is actually doing the whole thing, make it just easy for them about why they should hire you. So the first thing you should do is really think thoughtfully about the company, the team that you would potentially work for, and think of critical feedback that you can actually give them. Don't do it in a way that's like insulting to the company, but you can say, hey, there are like a couple of things that I didn't quite understand about how you approached this or how you did this. So that is already creating a problem, right, which is good. And then you say, and I thought that this would be an interesting way to approach the solution to this, and it might be a few different things that you come up with there. And then you end with saying, by the way, I'm the perfect person to actually solve this. And so what you've done is you've actually answered the whole equation for them. Here's the problem. This is the solution. I'm the perfect person to accomplish that. And it doesn't really matter if that's actually a problem for them. It doesn't really matter if they don't agree with your solution or not. What matters is that you've taken the time and effort to think through critically what that company, what that institution is doing, and you've put yourself in the shoes of, hey, I'm going to help them do things. I'm going to help them get value out of me instead of them trying to intuit that by whatever skills or experience you have. So that would be my approach.
You also mentioned the importance of entrepreneurship for students, and the quality you're looking for. How can a student show that, illustrate that part of their
So one thing that we look for is not necessarily experience with entrepreneurship, so you don't have to go and show that you've like started a company or anything like that, but you have the traits of an entrepreneur. The two key things that we look for are kind of your ability to self-direct and kind of self-motivate yourself to get something done. And that's important for a company of our size. We're not a big company because oftentimes you don't have all the structure that a really large company would have in place to help guide you down the path of accomplishing something. And so we look for those people that are go-getters that can really say, okay, if you give me this project and give me some information, I'm pretty confident that I can get somewhere with it. And so you can show that through anything that you've done in the past. Like, how are you able to showcase that you've taken something that's been loosely kind of coupled together and you've been able to see that through to fruition? Or what's an example of you going out on your own where it's not an employer telling you to do something or the school telling you to do something, but you saying, hey, I want to build this, or I want to do this, or this is something that I'm passionate about. Those types of things really ring true, at least to me at Parsley and my team members at Parsley.
What are some of potential internship opportunities at Parsley?
Yeah. So we had interns early on in the company, but we actually don't have any interns anymore. There's a couple of reasons for that. We thought that interns were a good way to get quality talent for not that much money, honestly, in the early days. But what we found out pretty quickly is that if you're going to have an intern, it's a two-way street. You need to make sure that they have the right infrastructure and support in place so that they're getting as much out of the job as you're getting. Because if they're not, then it just kind of falls by the wayside. I'm sure everybody here has had an internship where you just got thrown something, you sat at a desk, you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And those types of internships suck. And we just knew that, early, after we've gone through the process a couple of times, that we just didn't have the capacity to build that out right. And so we actually stopped taking interns. I think we're at a size now where we'll probably start considering taking more interns at the company, because I think we have a little bit more structure and more concrete projects that are defined in place where people can kind of run with that over the course of several months. What I would look for in that probably would be very similar stuff that I would look for in an employee at Parsley. I wouldn't really see those two things as different. So yeah, similar stuff that I said before.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Danny. I'm a first-year doctoral student here. And just, at a human level, I'm very interested in, and I'm always interested in reading the articles on entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs who sort of, you get to see behind the curtain, see what their daily rituals are, what are some tools they use to remain effective leaders.
Yeah.
And so I'm just interested in maybe if you have sort of a daily ritual or something that you depend on to sort of keep your head steady as an entrepreneur, and any tools that you use in terms of organization and stuff to sort of maintain.
Yeah, sure. So it's going to sound cliche a little bit, but I meditate a lot. I think the reason why it sounds cliche is because you hear a lot of entrepreneurs or CEOs that do this. I think the reason why is because it helps you reset your brain and be kind of mindful of everything that you have. One of the hard things to do is oftentimes you have to think about your business without a lot of emotion, because you have to really understand objectively what's going on. And I think meditating can help you do that. So that's one thing. For me, one of the reasons why Andrew and I are in this space is because we're content junkies. Like, we love reading everything, huge consumers of content. And so I have a couple of different tools that I use to stay on top of what's happening in two different industries. Actually, the two sites that I probably use the most are techmeme.com and mediagazer.com, started by the same person. They're aggregators, and so they try to look at what is kind of being talked about the most in both in coverage and then also in the social sphere. And they present that, and so that's been, I think, a pretty good way of me staying on top of stuff. In the social arena, I'm not as good as I would hope to be, but one app that I use a lot is Nuzzle. Nuzzle looks at who you follow on your social networks and then sees what they're actually tweeting, and then you can set alerts. So once it hits 5 people tweeting the same piece of content, then you're like, oh, I should read this, and you get an alert for it. So that's another one that I use. For networking, one of the good things or hacks, I guess, that I've used is a site called Newsly, spelled, or Newsle, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Newsle. I think it was bought by LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken. But it is a company that I think does something pretty clever, which is anytime somebody gets mentioned that you're connected to on LinkedIn in any kind of media, so they got interviewed or they got featured, it sends you a newsletter roll-up of everybody that's been covered. It is an awesome way to then go back and say, hey, congrats for getting covered. By the way, we should catch up. And it's been a way that I've been able to build and sustain relationships too. For my sort of daily workflow, I use Todoist, which is like a to-do app to stay on top of tasks, but I don't use it in an obsessive way. I've gone down that path before where it's I need to have a list for every single task that I want. I think one thing that the human mind is really good at is filtering out what is and is not important. And so every single day you can ask yourself a question, which is, what are the 3 things that are most important to me? And your mind is automatically going to pick out the 3 most important things, and that is going to be irrespective of whatever you have on the to-do list that you built. And so I think that's a really great way of kind of centering, okay, these are the most important things that my mind is telling me I should be working on, because these were the first 3 things that came up. So yeah, those are a few things.
That's great. Any more questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you so
Thank you
much. It has
much.
been a fantastic day for your visit. Thank you. Thank you. You're free.
Oh, great. Yeah.